So today we're going to talk a little bit more about details and how to use details correctly to answer questions. We've talked about asking questions, we've talked about looking for details, and a lot of details can be good and a lot of details can be interesting, but today we want to focus in on making sure that we find details that are actually answering our questions. And in order to be sure that our details are actually answering our questions, we need to be able to explain how they answer the question. If we can't explain how they answer the question, then they might not be the right detail that we need. So there are lots of interesting details and there are lots of important details, but if we're answering a specific question, we need to learn how to focus in on just those details that we need. So I'm going to show you the question that we're going to be looking at together today. The question that we're going to be looking at today is, how were New England's forests important to their economy? There's a couple things to consider. First, make sure we understand we know what the question's asking. It's asking us how. So that's how does it lead to something that makes something happen. So important to their economy. Economy was one of our vocabulary words the other day, and that has to do with how an area makes money, the things that it produces and the jobs that they have in a certain area that helps that area make money. So I found some details from the reading, and I want to show you where and how I found those details. So the question was, how were the forests important to New England's economy? So I have a reading here that's called Logging and Shipbuilding. So I do have to use some prior knowledge to understand that I can get information from here, because logging has to do with cutting down of trees, and trees comes from forests. Shipbuilding, back then ships were made of wood, wood comes from trees come from forests. So I have to be able to understand the connection between the forest and the money that's being made off of what comes from those forests. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this here. It says the lumber industry made up a large part of the colony's free market economy. An industry is all the businesses that make one kind of product or offer one kind of service. So that's good information. It gives me a definition of industry, and it tells me that lumber is an important part of their industry, but it's not telling me how. So that detail, while it has good stuff in it, isn't important to know and will help me understand the reading, is not yet really answering my question. So I'm going to continue. In the forests of New England, especially what are today New Hampshire and Maine, loggers cut down trees. They sent the trees to sawmills to be cut into lumber. Other colonists used their skills and knowledge to build houses, barns, and churches out of the lumber. Much of the lumber was sent to markets in England, which had fewer trees. Now I'm going to share another strategy with here with you guys. And that is, I'm going to stop at the end of this paragraph. And I'm going to think about this paragraph before I move on. It's a lot easier to think about it in chunks and make sure I understand each chunk before I move on. Because if I get to the end of the whole thing and I am confused, it's not very helpful. So I want to stop as I'm reading and make sure I understand and kind of chunk the material. So I'm going to chunk into that first paragraph, and I'm going to stop and say, okay, make sure, number one, I understand what that first paragraph means. And number two, is there any information there that I could use? And so, all right, yeah, it's talking about cutting down trees and cutting things into lumber and building stuff. But wait a minute. These people have to do this. So these things could all be jobs for somebody. And if they're jobs that come from the wood that come from the forests, then that would show how the forests are important to the economy. So what I would need here is, I'm thinking here that you need loggers cut down trees, so that's a job. They're making money doing that. Other colonists use their skills and knowledge to build houses, barns, and churches, so that's providing money for people. Oh, and sawmills. A sawmill is where they cut the lumber, so somebody's got to run that mill, so that must be giving them a job as well. So those are kind of all ways that shows it as part of the economy. So let's continue and see what else we can find. New England forest also supplied the natural resources needed to make naval stores. Is that like a store where we buy naval goods? The products used to build ships. Oh, it gives me a definition right after. You'll notice that sometimes in the reading. So naval stores are the products used to build ships. So let me read this again, make sure I understand. New England foresters also supply the natural resources needed to make naval stores, the products used to build ships. Okay, so they can build ships with the stuff that comes from the forest. 2 naval stores, turpentine and tar, were used to make a coating that prevented leaks. Logs cut in the forest were floated down rivers to coastal towns. There, workers used naval stores to build and repair ships. Shipbuilders formed the ship's hulls with oak. Oak is a type of wood. Wood comes from forests. To make the masts, they used tall pines. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on, but I can kind of zoom it down to a couple things here. I can look here and I can say that they supplied the natural resources they needed to make naval stores. Okay, and then over here, up top over here, it says that they use the naval stores and also the wood that we talked about being cut down before to build and repair ships. So shipbuilding provides jobs for people, and then obviously if they build those ships, they're going to be selling them to somebody. So that would be a good detail to use. All right. Europeans valued strong ships built in New England. By the late 1700s, nearly 1/3 of all English ships had been built in this region. One reason was that the low cost of building ships there. Because wood was not plentiful in Europe, it cost more to build ships there than it did in New England. Now, this is kind of interesting because if I read this and I stop and I think about what I just read, that means that it was cheaper to build the ships in New England. So the people in England were really willing to buy them from the people across the ocean in North America and New England building the ships. So that's providing an industry for them. The shipbuilding industry contributed to the growth of coastal towns and cities. Several New England cities, including Boston and Portsmouth, became major shipbuilding centers. All right, so now I'm going to show you how I used some of these details to answer the question. Okay, let's first look at the instructions at the top of the page. There's our question today. How were New England's forests important to their economy? It says find 3 or more details that show how New England's forests were an important part of how they made their money. After each detail, explain how it answers the question. So I need to make sure I can explain how the detail answers the question, because if I can't, it might not be the right detail to use. So let's look at some of this together. So here are some of the details I talked about in the reading. Loggers cut down trees. Okay, doesn't sound like it answers the question, but if I can explain how it answers the question, then I can use it. So cutting down trees provided jobs for people in New England. Okay, and jobs are part of the economy, so I was able to connect that detail to the question, therefore I can use it. Let's look at this one. They sent the trees to sawmills to be cut into lumber. Other colonists used their skills and knowledge to build houses, barns, and churches out of lumber. Okay. So again, how could I use that to answer the question? People worked and made money cutting up trees into boards that other people could use to build things for others, providing them with jobs, okay? And jobs are part of the economy, and all that wood is coming from the forest. All right, let's look at another one. Here's another one I talked about. This one, there was a lot of information about, and I'm going to kind of just highlight it here so you can see it, about New England's forest and the naval stores. And remember, naval stores are the things that they use to make ships. So there was almost like a huge paragraph talking about that. And instead of writing down the whole paragraph, I kind of cut it down to 2 important details. And in order to explain how I could use those, I went over here. So here's my explanation about how those details answer my question. It says the trees provided New Englanders with the ability to build ships where people could work to build them and then sell them. And obviously if you're selling something, you're making money, and that's providing to your economy. So I have to be able, each of these details I use, I have to be able to figure out how to connect them to my question. If I can't connect them to my question and I can't explain how they answer my question, then I can't use them. And if I use them, I have to be able to explain them. Okay, so there's kind of like this whole thing going on here. And sometimes people can use different details. You could have one person who would use 3 different details than another person. As long as both of those people can explain how their details answer the question, then both of those people have good details. So that's why the explaining part is important. And it also gets us thinking about details and what we can learn from them. So you'll notice that the last detail down here, I left blank, okay? And it says, the shipbuilding contributed to the growth of coastal towns and cities. Okay, So I want you to see if you can come up with an explanation as to how that would show. Let's see the question again. How are New England's forests important to their economy? So could you come up with an explanation that we can share together in class that would show how this detail answers the question? And we're going to talk about that together.